morning.
Good morning.
Thank you all for joining us. It's been a great conference. Hopefully you've been receiving a lot of information and internalizing it to take it back to your respective JCRCs and federations around the country. So as was mentioned, I'm Roy Waterman. I am the new, as I like to say, I'm 2 months old, but I happen to have a beard. So I've been working with JCPA for 2 months now, and I am the Criminal Justice Project Manager. So my role is to engage and educate the Jewish community about mass incarceration and criminal justice reform, as well as how do we merge the gap between the Jewish community and communities of color. How do we come to the place where we're working together? So a little bit about myself is I come to this work as a co-founder of a nonprofit organization which used the food truck industry to train, employ, and mentor the formerly incarcerated young people that came home from adult jails and prisons. And 2 years ago, we won the Best Food Truck in New York City award as well. So, thank you. Thank you. So also, so I'm a chef, I have a catering business as well, and I also have a paralegal degree. So I say all that good stuff to say that I'm also a formerly incarcerated man who spent almost 12 and a half years, almost 13 years in prison. So I said that to say that you can never judge a book by its cover because you never know one story. And I personally believe that everyone that is walking on the face of the earth has their own personal story or testimony that we are unaware of, and we have no idea that a possible good morning can set them off in any way, because there are a lot of people that are walking around damaged and dealing with a lot of trauma. We spoke about trauma. I've had breakout groups on Sunday where we talked about trauma, healing, and restoring. And I talked about how slavery has manifested itself into mass incarceration. And I also spoke about the Holocaust, right? And associating the trauma that was like dealing with the Holocaust and restoring, and how those two things can be somewhat parallel. They're not the same thing. We're not comparing them. What we're saying is trauma, right? Healing is healing. Hurt people. So we have to get to the place where we are not free until the most marginalized community in this country is free. And so I just want you to sit with that for a little bit, and I want to do a quick exercise with you right now. It's going to take about 45 seconds to a minute. So I want everyone in the room to close their eyes, please. And I want you to think about the worst thing you've ever done in your life, whether it's the worst mistake or the worst decision you've ever made. I want you to think about what that was, that thing, whatever it was. Now I want you to imagine whatever that worst thing is to be writing it down on a piece of paper. And now you take that piece of paper, and now you put that piece of paper on your forehead. And now you're going about your daily rituals, brushing your teeth, showering, getting ready, going to work, and you're walking out your house. So now everybody you encounter can see the worst decision or the biggest mistake you've ever made in your life. Imagine the feelings associated with it. Imagine how embarrassed you would feel. Imagine how ashamed you would feel, how ostracized you would feel, how hurt you would feel that your deepest, darkest secret is exposed. Well, I want you to open your eyes now, because that's how it feels to have a felony conviction in America. It is the scarlet letter of the 21st century. I have 3 felonies on my record, and no matter how much great work I do, it's never going to be erased. There are always going to be barriers, whether to housing, employment, or even higher education. So I have some incredible panelists who are friends of mine and also colleagues who are doing exceptional work in this space. And I wanted to do that exercise to prepare you so that you can be prepared for this conversation, because a lot of times we have privilege. Everybody in this room has privilege, right? And the unfortunate part is we don't realize that a lot of times we wake up with our privilege, right? We go about our business, but we also have biases that we operate every day. We have prejudice that we operate every day. So I'm going to, along with my panelists, I'm going to share stories that's going to help you understand what it's like to lead a movement, but also to be justice impacted, and it's going to help tear down some of the stigmas or the prejudice you might have about people who are justice impacted. Just pay attention to the language I'm using. Formerly incarcerated, justice impacted. I didn't use inmate, I didn't use ex-con, I didn't use felon. It's all about people first language. So as long as we keep people first language, people who are incarcerated, people who commit a crime, it's all about humanity, it's all about dignity, and it's all about compassion as well. So I want to introduce my guests who are next to me. They're going to give a brief bio, talk a little bit about themselves, and you know, how they come to the work that they're doing now, and also how they discover their superpower. Because I believe they have superpowers as well. So I'll start with you, Topeka. You're furthest away, so tell us about you briefly. And I'm going to be strict, so when you hear me go, that means we have to stay focused.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and for just being in the space and understanding how important it is to engage in what mass incarceration is. Thank you, Roy, for having us here to share our experiences and the work that we're doing. And so, thinking about how did I come to this work, and I'll keep it a minute since I have two. I come to this work, as Roy said, with privilege. I was privileged enough to have a two-parent home. My parents were franchise business owners. I had the opportunity to take music, piano, flute, and dance classes, had recitals at Carnegie Hall. I had the opportunity as a woman of color to go to college. I went to an HBCU, at which point I ended up getting caught up in all the things that were going on off of the campus. Because as a person, and we all know, we go to college, we get away from our parents, and sometimes we just, you know, get engaged in different things that we're not used to being around. And so that's what I did. And then that ended up having me get caught up in the cycle of, you know, dating guys who were different than where I came from, or even what my parents wanted for me to do. And I ended up going in and out of the criminal legal system, getting arrested, whether it was because I was a girlfriend of someone, and then eventually sold drugs myself and ended up in federal prison. All while being the division chairperson for Amtrak Onboard Service Workers Union for New York and DC, all while being an entrepreneur and having two businesses. But still wasn't enough. And so I made that choice. And it wasn't until I was incarcerated and I started speaking to some of the women who were there that I learned the impacts of my decisions and what it did to women specifically in communities. And I speak all the time about a woman that I met. Her name is Christina, and she was a young white woman, and she had a baby. And I asked her why was she using drugs. Because I thought people who use drugs, they use them because they wanted to. And so she told me that she was being raped and sexually abused by her father, and he gave her the heroin and told her to take it and the pain would go away. And from that moment, I realized that people just didn't always have a choice, that they utilized drugs in order to cope and in order to just be in these traumatic situations. And it wasn't usually even a choice of theirs. In her case, it was a choice of her dad, someone she would look up to, someone we all revere, and yet she was being abused. And so it was in those moments of me really being able to take responsibility for what I had done and to really rededicate my life to God. And God placed on me that I had to help women who were coming home, who were less fortunate than me, because even while I was incarcerated, both my parents came, my brothers bought them because they're elderly. All of my friends came from college, whether I was in Virginia, Connecticut, or Greenville, Illinois. I was in federal prison. And I knew when I came home, I would have a safe home to go to. And I went back to my parents, and I would have resources. I went to New York Theological Seminary, and I had a mentor, Reverend Dr. Moody Shepherd. And I had all these things that many people did not and don't have. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to start my organization, the Leyla of Hope Ministries, which helps marginalized and disenfranchised women and girls who are transitioning back from incarceration through education, entrepreneurship, advocacy, spiritual empowerment, and housing. And we started our first house in October in the Bronx called Hope House, and we've had a lot of adversity because people felt, we talked about barriers, not in my backyard. It's great what you're doing, but we don't want you here. And so, you know, through our liaison and community activists, Roy was there, and we were able to stand together and stand up for Hope House. You know, we're there. We have 3 women in the house now. We're really excited to help them move and transition and have the same opportunities that I've had myself. And in the midst of that, also came on with Cut 50 as the director for the Dignity for Incarcerated Women campaign, which is to make sure that though we are looking to decarcerate, because we feel that in prison there's no place for anyone, but specifically no place for a woman or girl, that we still have to work on conditions of confinement and making sure that they're more humane, so that women aren't being shackled while they're in child labor or being put in solitary confinement just because they're pregnant, or having to be re-victimized and traumatized because male guards are walking through the bathrooms or through the dorms when women are undressed, or making sure that women are able to be in proximity to their children so that they don't have to travel all the way to Greenfield, Illinois when they have no resources. And so I'm really excited to work with that, and also on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126 every Sunday. Both Leyla and Roy have been on the show, and we talk about the issues surrounding criminal convictions, formerly incarcerated people, and collateral consequences.
Thank you. Thank you. So before Leyla goes, let me state a couple facts so you know about the history of incarceration. In 1980, we had 501,000 people incarcerated. Over the last 38 years, that rate has increased by 1.8 million people, so we now today have 2.3 million Americans who are incarcerated. 70 million Americans are walking around every day that have a criminal record. 70 million. Women are the fastest demographic growing when it comes to incarceration, right? Over the last 30 years or so, it has grown over 700%. Welcome, Mr. Johnny Perez. Give Johnny a hand clap. So also, there are 600,000 people that are released every year from jails and from prisons. So whether you want to see this as an issue that doesn't impact your community, you have to understand that 2.3 million Americans incarcerated, 70 million of them are walking around with a record, and 600,000 people are being released every day. Whether you like to admit it or not, this is an issue that impacts you in your community. And then the last couple facts are 1 in every 31 adults are incarcerated on probation or parole. 1 in every 3 blacks, 1 in every 6 Latinos, and 1 out of every 17 whites. So the system, as we know, was built on institutional racism, and we firmly believe that, and I often like to use the term, the system is not broken, it's working perfectly fine according to those who built it, right? So we have to realize that we're American white males who built this current system of oppression, and the way it's operating is not by accident. It is operating by design. It was created to oppress a specific demographic of people, and it's done that well for a very long time. So Leyla.
Hi everyone, thank you for being here. Thank you for inviting me to share my story. I guess I'll start with, my story varies a little bit from both Topeka and Roy. I was raised by a single mom. I first became involved with the criminal justice system when my son's father was incarcerated. My son was only 1, and my son's father was incarcerated for drug conspiracy charges. So my son and I lost our only source of support, and we became homeless. So in order to try and remove ourselves from that situation, I made some decisions that led me to also be incarcerated shortly after. So my son lost both his parents at a really young age. And while I was incarcerated, I saw so many people coming in and out, and I was like, so upset at them. I didn't understand. I was just livid at the fact that they had this opportunity to go home, and they were throwing it away because they would come right back. And I didn't understand, and I made this decision that I wasn't even gonna jaywalk when I came home, right? Like I thought I was gonna, that it was something that they were doing because they chose to. I didn't understand. And that's what a lot of people fail to see, I think. Even though I was in that situation, like I was incarcerated, And I saw that, I saw it that, what I saw was that they were making the decision to come back. Not the fact that they had so many barriers that were keeping them from being successful members of society. Because one of the statistics that Roy failed to mention is that there are 47,000 different laws and regulations that prohibit us from being productive members of society once we return. After having a conviction, even just being accused, puts barriers to education, to housing, to restricts your rights to vote. There's so many things that keep us from being able to succeed in life once we come home, and that is what I didn't realize myself until I was home. I made a decision that I was gonna set a good example for my son when I came home, and I was gonna go back to school, and I was gonna get a job, and I was gonna get to do all these things, and I went right to school when I came home. But the second I tried to find a job, when I submitted an application, I was called for an interview, and they asked me, so I see this gap. I was only incarcerated for 2 years. They're like, oh, I see a 2-year gap. Can you tell us what was the reason why you weren't working for 2 years? And I kind of stuttered a little bit, so he answered for me. He was like, was it because you were incarcerated? It could have been any other reason. I could have been on maternity leave. I could have been, so that meant that he checked before even calling me to just not hire me anyway. He made me open up about who I was and what I had done to not hire me anyway. And that really put me in a really bad place. I couldn't continue to go to school because I felt like, what is the point of me going to school if I'm not going to be able to be a successful member of society anyway, because this is always going to be a barrier. So it put me in a really bad place for a while until, that was in 2005, and I didn't return to school until 2014. I'm in school now. Like they mentioned before, I'm a senior at Columbia University. I graduate in a few weeks. But my transition to Columbia was a little difficult as well. But I guess I'll let Johnny introduce himself, and I'll get more into what the work that I'm doing.
Yeah. So Johnny, can you briefly introduce yourself and how you came to this work, and how did you discover your superpower?
So I'm the guy who's late. Thank you, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for having me. Thank you. Shout out to JCPA, and thank you also for working the leadership inside this space. I came into the work through direct experience. It didn't take me long to realize that the people in prison, everyone, most of the people looked like me, came from the same background. We all had similar educational experiences. I remember one of my teachers said, "Why would you want to become a doctor for? Isn't it better to become a construction worker?" Just thinking about being tracked into a completely different trajectory in life. And it wasn't until the age of 21 where I applied a criminal solution to poverty. And I was arrested for robbery and sentenced to a total of 15 years. And during that time, that's where I discovered the transformative power of education. But also, I thought about, what am I going to do when I get home after doing so much time inside of prison? And I realized that I had an experience that although disproportionately affects a large number of Americans, there are also a large number of Americans who have never seen the inside of a prison cell. So I decided to turn that pain into the wisdom where I can then use that to not only catalyze change, but also raise awareness of what goes on inside our nation's jails and prisons. So we send people to prison as punishment and not for punishment. And if you go out there, you see the little booth around solitary confinement. I've managed to kind of plant my flag there on solitary confinement as a person who spent 3 years in isolation from teenage years all the way to my adult years. And now we're working on a piece of legislation, of course, to change that and stop the inhumane use of solitary confinement. To answer your question, as far as what I think my superpower is, that was in the script. No, when I think about the superpower, right, I think about just being able to connect with people who don't look like me, who do not come from the same background, And I do that through just basically anchoring whatever I'm gonna say or my experience in our shared values. It doesn't matter where you come from, socioeconomic background, we can all agree on some basic tenets of what it is that we want. We want safety, we all care, we value compassion, you know, we value family, we value honesty, we value justice, we value equality. And if we start from there, then I think that we can get to a place where we are also on the same page.
I didn't answer my superpower, how I found my superpower. So my superpower, I want to say that I found in March of 2015 as I was standing at a conference. It wasn't a conference, it was a gala. And I was standing on a red carpet with my shero, Michelle Alexander. And at that point, I had a really, really, really hard time speaking about my crime, my history. So as I was standing at the red carpet trying to take a picture with her, what I started to do was cry. Those who know me know that I'm very sentimental, and all I was trying to tell her was, I was trying to thank her for being a voice for me. And that's why I was crying. So I was pissed off at myself that I was standing there trying to take a picture with this woman that I admired so much. And all I could do was cry, but I somehow was able to tell her, thank you for being a voice for me. But as I was saying it, I thought, like, she shouldn't have to be a voice for me. I should be able to be a voice for myself, especially since she hasn't been directly impacted. And as much as, you know, she's very knowledgeable about the things that are going on inside the prison and in our society, she hasn't been directly impacted. So it was my duty to speak up for those who we left behind.
Thank you. So in case you don't know who Michelle Alexander is, she's an attorney. She's like a civil rights icon, I guess you can say now, who wrote the book called The New Jim Crow. You should read it. It's about mass incarceration, and it's about the progression from the Jim Crow to mass incarceration, and also something else you should be mindful of looking at or viewing at your local JCRC should be the movie, the documentary, The 13th, which is about the 13th Amendment. If you haven't seen it, you really need to see it to get educated on the history of mass incarceration, how we've grown from a place where a 40-year issue has now turned into 2.3 million people being swallowed and digested by the system. So you're getting a snapshot of the conversations that we plan on bringing to local JCRCs around the country by having people who are justice impacted, who are leading movements, but more importantly, sharing their stories. Not so that they can bring out the level of humanization in them, so that we can bring out the level of humanization in you. To break down your stigmas, to break down your prejudice. This is a conversation, as I was telling people yesterday, this conversation is a conversation that you have to be uncomfortable with being uncomfortable. This is not a comfortable conversation. And we're gonna talk about, like, this is about racism. This is about, like, discarding bodies. So my next question to my guest is, briefly, because I don't want to have Q&A, so I'll just ask one other question, and that is this. What can the Jewish community do to be more involved with these human rights violations to dismantle the criminal injustice system that currently exists? I'll start with you, Topeka.
Good, great. Well, I think this community is no different than any other community, and to use your power and your influence and your privilege. You know, speak to your local legislators, let them know what's happening. When you go into the prisons, because I remember a lot of times that there were rabbis that came into the federal prison where I was, and they would just specifically speak to those sisters who were practicing within Judaism, instead of also being open and embracing other people from other religions, or even wanting to find a religion or, you know, a family that they can be a part of. So I think opening up that space for other people when you're going inside the prisons is also helpful, because it allows people to understand what community is and what relationship is and what building is. I also think that it's really, really important to, while we're home, to open the doors and embrace people from all communities and of all races and of all colors. When you are connected to yourself and your faith and your family, because a lot of sisters, the only family that they have, or brothers, is the sisters and brothers that they left behind. And so when you come home, you're looking for that community. And because you're such a powerful community, I think it would be really helpful to open the doors to everyone who's coming home. And lastly, I would add is just really changing and redefining diversity. Diversity in the workplace, diversity in education, what does that look like? It expands much greater than just race, religion, and gender. You know, and being inclusive of people who have criminal convictions or who have been impacted by the criminal legal system.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
John.
Yeah, there are a few things. So in my role now, I'm the director of U.S. prison programs for the National Religious Campaign Against Torture. Now, I regularly work with faith communities, and what I do is I help faith communities build the capacity to engage in advocacy around issues of mass incarceration, specifically conditions of confinement, hence solitary confinement. And the three main things that really come to mind, first for any faith community, is that you're in a really great position to hold legislators morally accountable to the values that they say they stand for. And of course, that sounds very simple, but you'll be surprised how many legislators won't listen to me, but may listen to you. And some other legislators, although they may be open-minded or maybe in a space where they want to do something, I find a lot of legislators don't want to make a move until another legislator does. So you find yourself with this chicken or the egg problem, running around like with your head cut off, so to speak, trying to figure out who's going to sign the legislation first in order to catalyze the rest of the legislators to move. So in other words, if you can talk to somebody who I can't talk to, then that's how you can help me. There's a friend of mine who actually Glenn Martin, who talks about, he was here, I think, a few years ago, who mentioned, those who are closest to the problem, also closest to the solution, but also furthest from the power and resources. Right? So as a result of that, you can amplify our voices, and not only that, but you can support our efforts by carrying our message to folks that we can't carry it to. One. Two, the reason a lot of these policies are in place in the first place is because people who are incarcerated are not seen as human in the first place. And some of that reflects itself in the language, right? You hear some of the language, right? Inmate, convict. We saw similar language in World War II, right? Where we have to dehumanize people in order to do whatever we want to them. Or with this fear narrative. And we kind of see it now with this current administration, we're demonizing an entire group of people, not because of what they've done, but because of who they are. So one thing that we can do is we can think about our literature, we can think about the information that we have inside of our agencies, even the way in which we describe people that have been impacted by just humanizing and saying people who've been incarcerated, formerly incarcerated people, currently incarcerated people. Because when you see people as people, then it's difficult to treat them any other way. And then the last thing that I would say is to, in addition to the adversity piece, is that it may feel like it's a big issue and what am I going to do? But the piece is that if everybody thinks like that and no one does nothing. So the last thing that I would just ask you to just hope and to believe. And what that means is that, think of mass incarceration as this giant elephant or giant animal, whatever. And it's so big that I can't see you on the other side, I can't see you on the left, I can't see you on the right. But I'll grab my piece of this animal and I'll leverage my resources, I'll leverage my power, I'll put everything on it, and I'll pull, hoping that you will also do the same on your end of the puzzle, and eventually we'll all topple the beast.
Thank you, Leyla.
So I promised that I'd say a little bit more about what I'm doing, so I'm going to take advantage of that now. So Beyond the Box initiative was started at Columbia University, and it's a way to remove barriers to education for formerly incarcerated people. The reason why I started that was because when I decided to apply to Columbia, not because I really wanted to attend Columbia, but because I was trying to show something to my 16-year-old son who I was trying to get to apply, and he was like, no, I'm not the top 3%, I'm never gonna get in. I was like, well, okay, unfortunately you're not the top 3%, not because you're not smart enough, but because you don't put in the effort. But you have a good story, use that to your advantage. And he still didn't want to. So I said, you know what, you stubborn little kid, I'm gonna apply. What's the worst that can happen? I'm gonna lose $80 and the world is not coming to an end. I'm still at a good school. I'm a student at Hunter. I'm graduating in a few months because I lost 40 credits in the transfer. And to my surprise, not only did they accept me, but I received a full scholarship. But the thing about that was that I almost didn't finish the application, because when I got to page 5, there was this question that said, have you ever been convicted of a crime? For education. And it just took me back to 2005 when the wind got knocked out of me for this job opportunity that I was trying to obtain. And I thought I was not going to be accepted, so why even finish the application process? I couldn't believe that this was part of the calculus for me to obtain an education, not even a job, right? So with the support and encouragement from some loved ones, I finished the application, but I didn't answer it the way they wanted me to. They wanted to know why I had been incarcerated, but I simply told them that, like everyone else, I was human and I made mistakes, some of which led for me to be incarcerated, but this is who Leyla was. Leyla was the person who had come back to school after 10 years and had a 3.9 GPA, and while all doing this while being a single mother and having an internship and doing a million other things. But shortly after being accepted, and I decided to take on the school and to try and have them remove the barriers, remove the question from the application. They still haven't removed it, but I've also been working with a coalition of people around the country, and we've gotten the box removed at a state level from New Orleans, Maryland, and Washington State. And it was also removed from SUNY here, but we're still working. Like Johnny said, we're trying to pass it at a state level in New York, and if you can help, if you know of any legislators here in New York that you can speak to and tell them to pass S3740, I would really appreciate it. We're also working with Senator Booker to remove it at a federal level.
Thank you. So I want to make a quick statement, and then we're going to open up for questions, because I condensed the amount of questions I was going to ask the guests. I really wanted them to share their stories so that you can process and absorb that, and I really wanted to put it in the hands of you to ask any questions. Like any questions that you might think that, as I was telling somebody yesterday, prison is not like Prison Break, it's not like Oz, it's not like Orange is the New Black. So if you have a question, ask the question. I firmly believe that the stupidest question you can ever ask is the one you never ask. I'll say that again. The stupidest question you can ever ask is the one you never ask. So that means there's no such thing as a stupid question. So the Jewish community knows what it's like to be marginalized and segregated against and dehumanized in America. So if there's a group of people who can understand and relate to some of the issues that people of color in this land face, it should be the Jewish community. When you're incarcerated in America, your name is removed and you're given a number. So I was given a number, they were given numbers as well. I was given 2 numbers actually, because I spent time in state and federal prison. I went to prison at 19, I came home, I was 32. And 99, age 6054, 353083. I can remember these numbers. These are numbers I will never forget. And as a Jewish community, I know how impactful numbers are when it comes to being marginalized, when it comes to being labeled, right, as an object rather than a human being. And part of going to prison is to absorb or extract your identity as an individual, and to put you in a place where you're more in an easier place to be objectified. And as was mentioned earlier by Johnny, it's so much easier for you to do things to a prisoner or inmate or murderer or monster or predator, but it's much harder for you to do things to Roy, the son, Leyla, the mother, Topeka, the sister, Johnny, the father. So we're gonna open up for questions, and please, there are 2 microphones. There's one there and there's one there. Or if you wanna raise your hand, well, yeah, the microphones is probably better. So we're gonna start off with the questions. Yes.
So I want to preface my question with a statement of me too, to carry over from the previous, the theme from the previous program. My brother is a recovering alcoholic who is incarcerated because his alcoholism led him to writing bad checks to cover bills and debts, etc., and spent 2.5 years in state prison in Chino, California. When he got out, my brother was lucky because he met a jail lady who was visiting from the Jewish community in Los Angeles, visiting Jews in the state prison. And she is now my sister. She became my sister-in-law 28 years ago. They got married. But when Mark got out, Harry realized that people get out of prison and they got no place to go. They got no place to live and nobody will hire them. And she started a halfway house for Jews coming out of jail that has evolved into a residential treatment center that used for people with addictions, ex-cons, formerly incarcerated.
Yes.
Formerly incarcerated. And they use Judaism, 12 steps, and psychotherapy as part of their process. They've also become a place for alternative sentencing. And so a portion, I think about 20 of the 140 beds are used for alternative sentencing. Ain't enough. So the question I want to ask to all of you is, what do you think, and what should we be doing in finding ways to create more alternatives to incarceration for people who do commit crimes, who do have addictive behavior, who do need help, and what kind of a difference do those programs make over incarceration?
Okay, anyone wants to jump on that immediately?
Those types of programs are what we need more of, definitely. I know of a few programs here in New York City which have like a 0% recidivism rate, which is the rate of what people go back to prison. So I would love to that we find more ways to make programs like that. That's something that the Jewish community should definitely try to invest in, creating programs that.
I would add to that also that it is important. I mean, we talk about decarceration. We want to stop people from even going into prisons, which, as Leyla and you said, is the #1 thing. I think that if there are ways for you to even engage in utilizing property that you may have had, repurposed property. I mean, I've been talking to a lot of churches recently all over the country who are beginning to want to repurpose their property to us through the Leyla of Hope Ministries so that we can do that. But we actually have one woman that we have who's an alternative to incarceration. And thinking about how can we start doing diversion and then also legislation around it. So they just passed in Massachusetts a primary caretakers legislation which allows a primary caretaker of a child under the age of 18, which will affect both male and female, not to go to prison but have another community-based alternative. So I think, again, just picking back, influence, think about the properties and things that you may have access to or friends or family that does. How can you repurpose that to other community-based organizations that are doing the work and or starting something yourself?
Yeah, what's your name, sir?
I'm Neil Ford, Rabbi Neil Ford.
Hi, Neil. So I think you bring up an important issue, right? The balance between public safety and public health, right? Who truly is a danger in our society and who truly needs help. And of course, the system that we have, it's like a hammer that responds to every single issue as if it's a nail, And part of the work is being able to have increased transparency, to let people know exactly what's going on. A lot of folks don't know that we criminalize homelessness, we criminalize mental illness. we're criminalizing poverty, we're even criminalizing just being from another country. But there's legislators right now who are saying that you, Neil, want this piece of legislation to go through, or even if you didn't say it, right? Because we vote with our tax dollars. So part of the issue is really holding our legislators accountable and saying, hey, I'm not going to vote you back into office if you support this effort, right? And then with increased transparency, of course, by educating the public and letting your people in your own community know what happens, we also find that we have increased accountability and we can hold our legislators accountable not only to our shared values, but to their own values also.
Yes.
Good morning. I want to recognize your transformative work, and to do transformative work, you have to be someone who's transformed themselves, and each of you shared parts of your experience.
Introduce yourself when you come, please, to the microphone as well.
My name is Rabbi Matt Abelson from Pennsylvania.
Thank you.
So in Hebrew we call transformation tshuva, and the African American church has been a source of light in the midst of what has been darkness in America on many occasions. And so Topeka in particular, but also Johnny spoke about how the work that you do is involved with church. And what I'm interested to know is how the church can play a role in decarcerating.
Mm-hmm. So, for me, I think again, it's just about you. I mean, it all goes back to utilizing your privilege, utilizing your connections with local legislation and legislators. It goes back to holding people accountable. It goes back to educating and having forums and spaces in your community that allows people to understand that it impacts everyone. And it's also about like how do we intersect as it relates to different religious and practices. So we have Rabbi Joanne Katz, who reached out to us, who is a chaplain and goes into the prisons here in New York, but she wants to come and bring some students into Hope House in order to help and give them just some spiritual guidance, right? And I think that there are so many different ways that we decarcerate, because even when you think about physically removing people from prisons, you also have to decarcerate from your mind and your spirit, because this is something that, you know, it's a condition, and it's a condition based on circumstance. For a lot of people, it's not based on choice. So I think, you know, just to evolve the word decarcerate, yes, we want to remove, we want alternatives, but we also need people to be spiritually empowered and balanced so they understand psychologically, right, that they can do great things without the use of either drugs or alcohol. They can do great things with a support family and a community and a network.
I would only add that, you know, like, don't think that there's a magic wand that will eliminate the entire system. You know, this is a $1 million, a million piece puzzle, right? And you know, you can, if you just focus on one piece, you're good, right? And the reason and what does that look like, right? So for example, different faith communities, you know, I'm thinking about like how some churches, right, they've just been limited to, like, for example, just writing people in solitary. They're part of a Lifelines to the Solitary program. There's been other faith communities that have actually marched out with other faith communities in unison to stand against some type of atrocity. Like, for example, recently in DC, there was a big march against Guantanamo Bay, the movement there. Other movements tend to be a little bit less kind of adversarial. It might just simply be an op-ed, or it might be, you know, endorsing a sign-on letter that's calling for the justice or the stopping of the creation of another prison. Like, for example, in Virginia, right now there's a big battle trying to create two new youth prisons there after two were just shut down. You know, the faith community really took a strong stance on it, saying, no, we're not going to allow this, we can't have it. You know, it's one thing to have one person say something, but it's another thing to have an entire community of people echo that same sentiment.
That's right. That's right. Thank you.
Legislators tend to be afraid of faith leaders because they know that they have a community.
Congregation.
Yeah.
Yes.
My name is David Dranikoff, and I'm privileged to be one of the workers that Cheryl lets come here and do good work. And I'm also a former salesman for 50 years. And one of the things about being a salesman is you have to ask for an order. And you have given suggestions of things that we could do. But some people in this room own manufacturing facilities, small businesses, whatever that, and they could hire
Thank you.
one person. So I think as you speak across the country and do what is important, always ask for the order, always see if we can get a job for some of these people. Thank you.
Thank you, David. That's the key point, and to add on to that, as I mentioned before, in co-founding this nonprofit, what we did was we taught transferable skills to young people, and we honed in on their social and emotional learning so that we can prepare them on job training to then launch them into other opportunities. So really quickly before I let you go, I want to say this. There's a big movement nationally around second chance acts all over the place. And I'm going to address the chance terminology because I'm big on language. I am one that believes that we should remove the label chance from our dictionary because people who are returning home from jail and from prison do not need a chance. They need an opportunity. The business world and any other world does not identify or recognize when you use chance terminology. They look at it as being a form of charity, and chance is like closing your eyes and rolling the dice. So I challenge you to look at opportunities that exist, as what David just mentioned, providing opportunities for those who are justice impacted, who can bring a great level of worth and value to your organization.
Not just a job, but a living wage job, because it makes no sense to hire them and pay them a minimum wage when they still won't be able to cover their rent.
Yes.
Good morning, I'm Jessica Cohen, CRC Director in Cleveland, Ohio. Listening to some of your stories, it struck me that for much, much less in wealthier, more privileged communities, we seek mental health treatment and sustained, mental health, and there's access to that. So I'm just curious, for the formerly incarcerated population, are there initiatives that work to help people cope with years, lost years of the prime of their life, being separated from their children, all things that I think for people of we can't even conceive of the impact on that. So beyond the church and beyond, religion, what are practical other organizations that are pursuing this and able to get the people the mental health treatment that they could benefit from?
So there are several. But to quickly speak to that, I'll pass. There are several restorative justice, healing justice, transformative justice organizations that are dealing a lot of work. There is nowhere near enough organizations that are focused on dealing with the trauma associated with being a survivor of incarceration.
Yeah,
you add something.
I did want to add something. I think if you go back to even the trauma and violence and abuse that have been inflicted on people's lives, a lot of times, especially in communities of color, we don't talk about it. And if you go to see a psychologist or psychiatrist, and you look at it, it's crazy. So a lot of times families just pray, keep it within the family, and hopefully it'll disappear and go away. And what happens is people are then living with these things, right? These demons inside of them for decades, which then moves into and shows up in other places in your life. And while I was incarcerated, there was different programs, but a lot of people just, again, coped on different drugs. That's what they gave. They gave out drugs. There was something called pill line, and you would see twice a day a line, probably from the length of this room, of people standing in line to get pills, and then would just go back and lay down all day. And then you come home, and then you don't have access to those same pills. So what do? You find something else that can have you sleep all day. So I think, for me, in my experience, the restorative justice is a little different than what I'm speaking about. And so, yes, there are some great organizations doing restorative justice work, and there are community-based organizations that speak to health, but it's not really impacting our community, I feel, in any type of way.
Yeah, and I would also warn, right? I think about sometimes not a lot, but there have been many reentry organizations that they get so big that everybody gets rubber stamped, right? Or sometimes when we come out of prison, right, we all have this rubber stamp diagnosis. Everyone's antisocial because you broke the law. Everyone's this, everyone's that, right? So as a result, it impacts the effectiveness of any possible treatment. And I'll couple that with the fact that in a lot of communities, specifically communities that have been ravaged by mass incarceration, there's this natural distrust of systems. Where you're always sitting over on the other side of the desk. You're always the one who needs to be diagnosed or prescribed something. So there is this natural distrust of saying, I'm not even gonna go there. And of course, that has its own ramifications. And you couple that with the stigmatization of even having a mental challenge, and then we have a lot of the issues we have now. You know, in my past work, I worked for the Urban Justice Center as a reentry advocate. And we actually did a study where we actually looked at about 123 people who were returned back into society for the last 5 years. And we found that people were being released from prison without medication, overdiagnosed, underdiagnosed, over-medicated a lot of times, right? Untreated for years because of the highly stigmatized nature of having a mental challenge during incarceration. And as a result, the folks who are actually doing very effective work have been smaller organizations, smaller firms that are able to kind of individualize the treatment of the folks coming back. But I'll tell you, that's not enough. When I came home, I didn't have anybody to talk to except someone else who had went through the process that can say, hey, it's okay, or go here, or go there, or talk to this person, or talk to that person. And it wasn't because I was mandated by the state, or there was some type of treatment plan in place for me to even have that. In fact, and I'll end with this, I've worked with clients who have received addresses to clinics that didn't even exist. And they've walked back and forth on the block thinking that their mind is playing tricks on them when the building doesn't even exist. And that's the current system that we have now.
Thank you. This is actually the last question. Sorry. But you can cast it up after we go off the stage.
So I'm a daughter of Holocaust survivors, and thank you for drawing that comparison. And even with the help of the Jewish community, my mother was a slave laborer. There are pages that say name of prisoner. When she got here, when they got here, starting a family, they had a language barrier. And they were suffering from the trauma that you're discussing. All of you are so articulate. I'm so impressed by your presentations. As a proud daughter of immigrants, what do the people do who don't speak the language, and there are a lot of them in the prison system? Who advocates for them? They can't express themselves the way you do.
I remember going to solitary confinement because I was helping somebody with their legal work who didn't speak English. I was born in Cuba. I speak English as my second language. I speak Spanish as my first language. And for that population, it's extremely even more difficult. I'm talking about, imagine going to a hearing and the person across from you is making a decision on your life and you don't even know what's going on. You won't even find out until later. Someone else tells you exactly what happened. So a part of that issue, a part of addressing that is to have increased transparency, whether we hold correctional officials accountable, because they like to play this shell game where they say that they're doing something when they're not, or say that something doesn't exist because we changed the name of it. So definitely holding them accountable, and again, and the reason I emphasize legislators is because correctional staff can make changes today, but if they leave their job tomorrow, that can go right back. So in order for us lasting change, we have to not only address the culture, but also codify these changes into law. And with increased transparency, we also see increased accountability.
Yes. We do have time for one more question. And I know you were next. Maybe more, I don't know. We have to advocate to the powers that be. I'm getting the eyes, the winks, the fingers, the people directly sitting in front of me. So maybe you guys can go whisper in somebody's ear to advocate for more time.
I'd like to. All right. I'm Tom Resnick. I'm from Cleveland, like Jessica. So in my mind, it's going to be really hard to, end this overnight and have, 1 million people released from prison and changing the culture. A lot of it to me is kind of how do we avoid it in the first place? Whether it's education of children, supporting the children of people that are in prison, ending the cycle of poverty. How do you kind of look at that as, is that a separate thing that is a whole other mission for other people? Or is that something that your organizations and your efforts tie in comprehensively as well?
They tie in comprehensively. Like Johnny was mentioning before, this is a puzzle with 1 million pieces, and we all have to tackle it from a different angle. Education is definitely something that I really advocate for, especially, I know that you're asking for people to avoid prison in the first place, but the reason why I fight so hard for education for formerly incarcerated people is because the higher the education level, the less likely people are to return to prison. That's been the only thing that's been demonstrated to reduce recidivism. So definitely fighting for education, not only for formerly incarcerated people, but for people who have not been to prison either, because obviously if it reduces recidivism, the higher the education level, how likely is it that if you are educated, you're not going to go to prison? So
I want to add to that point, and I'll add to that point by saying, so what you're talking about basically is a school to prison pipeline, but also more importantly, before that, we're talking about poverty, right? And we have to understand that poverty and incarceration go hand in hand with one another. We can't address incarceration and think we can't address poverty in communities of color, right? And as well as lack of education. We have children who are in elementary schools who are being scored at the 3rd grade level, and they're building prison beds based on their scores. That's the school to prison pipeline that exists today. So we have to address the issue of poverty, where there's lack of employment, lack of, a livable wage employment, lack of education. How about one we never talk about? Lack of healthy, sustainable food. Communities of color have the highest rates of diabetes, high cholesterol, cancer, you name it. And it's completely associated with poverty and associated with processed foods and things like fried foods, processed foods, and all these things end up leading to mass incarceration. So we have to deal with the issue of poverty. As you know, mass incarceration is, Johnny mentioned, is a humongous monster. Poverty is like half the earth, probably. I don't know. Like, it's a whole nother thing to address, but it needs to be addressed. So it's nothing that's impossible, but I feel like we have to address the issue of poverty in order to address people from even being intercepted by the system in the first place.
I'd like to add, I know just real quick in the interest of time, that, so yes, we should prevent people from going in the first place, right? We look at how many laws were on the books in 1980. I think it was about 3,700. How many laws on the book? At least federal laws on the books now, about more like 45, 4,600. So this is increased. It's like 700 or 800 more ways to land in prison, right? We look at the Rockefeller drug era, where there were these huge discrepancies between crack cocaine and powder cocaine, and how one person can get 3 years in prison, but another person can get 20 years in prison for the same exact thing. Right, so we thinking exactly what laws are we even allowed to be put in place in the first place, but also to taking away the incentive, taking away the incentive for incarcerating in the first place. And when I think about the biggest incentive is profit, right? We live in a country where we have actually profiteering off the pain of people. And one thing that this particular crowd can do is that you can rethink or actually look into your investments, right? Where are your money? What is your money really supporting? Right? If you knew, when I was at Google doing a talk and said, well, if your t-shirt said made in prison, would you buy it? Well, if your investment said, hey, this money is going to be used to create another private prison in which, whatever the case may be, would you still invest it? If you Google the sale of private prison, you would think that they were selling cars. In fact, if you even listen to board minutes of private prisons meetings, you would never believe that they're talking about human beings. For the salesman, return on investment, guaranteed occupancy rate. There's some private prison industry that have sued states because they didn't keep at least 80% of the prison full. So really thinking about, where is my money going, how is it being used, and if it's not in line with your values or your moral consciousness, then I would urge you have a moral responsibility to divest.
Sorry, there's no more questions. So I'm here for my family. Before Rennie says something, I'll say this. It's very difficult to heal from something that continues to harm you every day. Rennie.
So, I'm inspired. I hope you're inspired. There's a couple things that we can all do to make this a successful project. One is, go home to your communities and take, as Johnny says, one piece of these million opportunities to do something to help reform the criminal justice situation. Get your community relations committee to participate in this project. We are so fortunate to have Roy managing this project. I think we've had a couple of sessions now, and you've had an opportunity to hear how lucky we are to have Roy and what he can do wants to come to your community and inspire them the way we are being inspired today, there's a second thing you can do. We are also very fortunate at JCPA in that our criminal justice project has been supported by a grant from the Leon and Toby Cooperman Family Foundation. It's a matching grant for a 3-year period. It's such a powerful discussion that we're having, and we need to invest in this project. You have on your tables a flyer about matching grants, opportunities to invest, to fund in this project. If you have access to foundations or even individuals who can participate in this project, match our grant from the Cooperman family, make this a really well-oiled, very effective program. Take these home, talk to your communities, see who can help us. We need to know. If you know, tell Melanie, tell Roy, tell me, tell JCPA how you know somebody who can help us make this project be a reality. So once again, thank you to our extraordinary panel, and take a break. We have 11 o'clock programs that will be assembling in a little while, so congratulations to you for participating in this great, great project.